in life, the only person you really let down is yourself if you don't follow through on your commitments. And so if I was going to show up well for the world, for my family, for my community, then I had to sort of stand up to myself first.
As a vegan, do you ever feel like you're living in a parallel universe, aware of things that many others don't even seem to notice, let alone acknowledge? I'm Chrissy Benson, host of the Vegan Posse podcast. We talk with vegans from around the globe who, like you, are living lives of integrity and compassion with an eye toward justice. Through their personal stories, you'll come to see that you're not an outlier. In fact, you're part of an entire posse of individuals who aren't just keeping the peace, they're creating it through their food choices and beyond. You won't be saddling up, but you're in for the ride of your life. Welcome to the Vegan Posse. Hey Posse, I'm your host, Chrissy Benson, coming to you from Music City, Nashville, Tennessee. First, just a few announcements. As always, if you haven't yet picked up a copy of the vegan women's fiction classic, Marrying Myself, by me, Christine Melanie Benson, what are you waiting for? It's a fun read with a vegan protagonist and a deeper message about the most important relationship we've got. And by making it an Amazon bestseller, together we can normalize veganism through the arts. Next, as you probably know by now, I hope you know by now, we've got a monthly series called Posse Talk, where my friend and colleague, Dr. Jen Hawk, and I shoot the breeze and answer your questions. So if you've got comments and questions, email them to veganposse.email@gmail.com. And finally, I do offer personal coaching via Zoom. So if you're looking for help in more effectively navigating life, love, relationships, all that good stuff, contact me directly at christinembenson@gmail.com. And now this week, the Vegan Posse is delighted to welcome Joe Gagnon, who is an ultra endurance athlete, super successful businessman and CEO, and just a really fascinating guy. He's an author. He's run 6 marathons on 6 continents in 6 days, in addition to a whole host of other crazy athletic feats. And he's just a really interesting guy. So his latest book is called Living Intentionally, where he seeks to unify his life lessons into a framework that people like you and me, the regular folks, can put into action. So I can tell you that the more I talked to Joe, the more fascinated I became and the more interesting the conversation got, just in terms of how he sees the world and how he goes about getting stuff done. So I hope that you enjoy this conversation with Joe Gagnon. Well, Joe, welcome to the Vegan Posse. Are you ready for the ride of your life?
Always, Chrissy. The more interesting, the better, right?
Exactly. Yes. So you've done so many interesting and amazing things that we're certainly not going to be able to cover everything. But why don't we start with your vegan journey? So as a kid growing up, did you ever think much about the animals in our food system?
No. I grew up predominantly influenced by my mother's family, which was first generation Italian, and, meatballs and I don't know, every kind of meat you could possibly eat. Probably, the only accommodation we made was having fish on a Friday. So no, as I tell people, I never could imagine having not had any meat now for, 20 years. It was a journey. I say, don't hold on to no so hard that you might not explore. It's sort of fun in a way to have written down what I've done every day for the past 25 years, because we could look it up right now. Like, what did I do on a Thursday in January in 2005? And I can go back and I'm like, oh, wow, that's pretty fun. And I have all these different reasons. The animal part, the nutrition part, all came together through my life. But no, I would have bet probably all the money I didn't have on that I would still be eating meat all these years later.
Yeah, yeah. It is funny how most of us don't. I know I didn't think much about it. I thought a little bit about it. My dad used to take us fishing every once in a while, and there were a few times when I, accidentally knocked over the bucket to,
Mm.
let the fish go back into the water and things like that. But my grandfather, my mom's mother is Ukrainian, and her parents ended up having a farm in New Jersey, southern New Jersey, with chickens. So
Mm.
even with that in my history, I never really thought about it. So
I
it's
think the other thing is I had no influences that would have even
yeah,
introduced me. I, there's so many parts of the food system that I didn't even explore. Forget becoming vegan. I didn't even know an avocado existed.
yeah,
I
yeah.
didn't kale. Like none of these things were in the general awareness. Might have certainly in college different, but maybe in high school heard about a vegetarian.
Hmm.
But no, no influence. So you didn't even have the chance to be interested or curious.
Yeah, yeah. So tell us about the journey. What was it that first, sparked an interest in you in what you were putting in your
Well,
body?
in some way, I had a bit of a blessing because I didn't have to decide. The first part was, and I was like in my late 20s and early 30s, would eat red meat and I would feel sick afterwards.
Hmm.
I would get these incredible pains in my abdomen, and it was such a terrible journey. I was like, but if you cook it more, then it hurts less. So I had, and I went to the doctor to ask him about it, and he said, well, appears you have this enzyme deficiency. And so we could give you that to help you digest the meat. And I'm like, well, that sounds like a stupid idea. Why don't I just stop eating red meat?
Hmm.
And so, so I was clicked into the first part
Hmm.
just from straight up almost survival,
Yeah.
health and so that was good because then all of a sudden, and it took a while. It took really 10 years because that was in, I got, I don't dare age myself, but that was, 30 years ago that I stopped eating the red meat. And then, but, chicken and turkey and fish didn't bother me at all. So I didn't pay much mind to that. And then it was a little bit crazy was I got to work uh, at IBM and I was running the retail business globally. And so I visited all our customers and I happened to be in Arkansas visiting Walmart. And one of the guys I work with said, oh, let's go visit Tyson Foods. And, they're the biggest protein processing company, at least in the United States. And I went there and I learned a lot more about what happened to chickens. And I was like, oh, this is a bad idea. This is just horrible. And we went to visit. You're not allowed to, but I went anyway and visited a couple of these chicken barns. And then that was it. Like you couldn't ever imagine we could treat any other creature that poorly. So then that was really easy. And then I lumped chicken, turkey, pork all together, and I was left with fish. And so this is why it was a journey. It was years of
Hmm.
just adaptation. And so, in some way, and of course, once you get to just being plant based, more food opens up. But it wasn't so limiting because I always had a little bit of something. And, like almost everyone, you like something. I loved sushi. I thought it was sort of an interesting craft, the way that the sushi masters learn over time. And so that was the last part of the journey. While this is going on, I started deeply getting into endurance athletics. I became an Ironman racer, started running ultra marathons, and I started realizing the importance of nutrition in my performance. So then I gave up alcohol over 20 years ago because that wasn't helping. And then the last part of the equation was, well, I'm not sure I need the fish. So why don't I just take that out? And so then, I became completely plant based. And so, but it was not like some people think it's very hard. It was not challenging. You might suggest that people go faster, whatever people's choices are, the way they do it. But the way that I did it, it really made it quite easy because take one piece out, and finally you're left with this plant-based world. And it really helped my gut microbiome. I'm not a doctor, so I use that language as if I know what I'm talking about, but my system just works beautifully. Uh, I don't get any of the kinds of gastric issues at all. My energy is great. I don't know if one could really prove that they feel healthier, but if you look at what I've done over the past 25 years, you'd have to agree that I'm a pretty healthy specimen. It can't be coincidental that my performance stays where it does. And so, it was like, in some sense, it was fun because I was exploring.
Mhm.
And the question everyone always asks is, don't you miss it? And I'm like, miss what? And the way I did it, it became sort of just a conscious part of my thinking. I didn't consider, it didn't matter, wasn't giving anything up, it was gaining. And that was what was so beautiful about the process, the way that I went through it.
And what about the animal products like dairy and eggs? Were those tougher for you,
Those
or
were
when did those
towards
go out? Yeah.
towards the end as well. That one took more awareness, because just stopping to eat cheese is easy. Uh, and I hadn't drank milk. Like, I stopped drinking milk when I was probably 7 years old. I couldn't drink milk. I drank it and it would make me gag. So I've never drank milk really in my life, like most
Mhm.
kids and people. So that was easy, to not have the milk products. But when it's in a baked good, you have to build a different kind of awareness. So, the challenge in the ultra category was, where am I going to get calories from? Enough calories. I never had this fancy you couldn't get enough protein. That is just a myth that the beef or meat protein world tries to tell us. So that part was easy. It was just more about the casual foods that
Mhm.
might have some dairy product or egg product in them. So uh,
Right, the trace elements.
yeah,
Yeah,
and look, I can't prove sometimes something like if you wanted to, you know, put someone on a lie detector test, like, and you went to a restaurant and you ate something and they said it wasn't in there, you don't know. Like, you
sure.
just have to trust. I'm not trying to hold anyone else in account to the choices that I've made. I just try to. I know I eat best when I'm deciding what I eat, and I like it that way, and I feel better. I don't like the poor choice. You can be plant-based/vegan and eat pretty poorly. You
Sure.
know, some packaged foods that are really terrible. A lot
Yeah.
of ultra
Oh, yeah.
processed stuff. So that part, like, I'm like the biggest fan in the world of peanut butter and jelly. That's like a staple. I could eat that every day. I have sometimes for years and years at a time, every day for lunch. I also simplify my eating. I don't, 95% of eating is fueling and
Mhm.
health. So I don't worry about variety as long as the nutritional, complex is complete. That,
Okay. Yeah.
having my protein shake in the morning, my vegan protein shake that I have, actually it's made uh, in Ireland, sorry, and organic. I have that every morning, 50 grams, and I have peanut butter and jelly every day for lunch. And then the only variability really is dinner and maybe a snack here or there. It makes it easier.
Yeah. So it sounds like you don't have a very strong emotional attachment to food.
Not anymore. No. No, I did, in the beginning when your mother says 10 years after you stopped eating chicken, oh, don't you want to have chicken? Here's some meatballs. And so for a while that felt awkward. And
Hmm.
then, nah, I don't really feel like any pressure from the world or any people or I think this is like personal choice. I mean, I like the idea when other people live this way. I'm not
Sure.
campaigning. I like
Yeah.
to educate. It's different. I like to role model. So no, I don't have a strong feeling other than quality.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're able to, once you identify a product as not healthy for your body, you're able to just bring in some willpower and discipline and
Oh, yeah. I
yeah,
think
avoid it.
it would
I
be,
struggled with that. The reason I'm asking
yeah.
is I struggled with all of that for a while.
It's always funny when you talk about yourself after a while, you try to be, lacking ego. I think I'm probably as disciplined as any person you've ever met. Um, and I have the proof by the length and time of the commitments that I've made and how I've stuck to them. Forget any health related stuff. I've been writing a blog for 4,810 days in a row. So there are a lot of days in there where you could legitimately say you don't need to do it and who cares anyway.
Yeah,
But I've
yeah.
made the commitment. So my discipline is once I make the commitment, last year I did 175,000 push-ups, which is 500 a day. And I promise you, there are days when you sort of test yourself. And I've worked a lot of techniques that help me hold to it. So the same thing with food and alcohol. Uh, Once I decide, then I turn it off, and it does make it easier. There's no energy used,
Mm,
even when someone pushes me on it. I was
mhm.
thinking about this recently, how much energy we give up to people who aren't trying to help us. And why do we take their bad energy? Like, oh, why do you do that? You shouldn't do that. Don't do that. It's like if you have something good to say, then I'll listen. Otherwise, I think I made some pretty fair decisions and I'll stick to it. So my momentum stays very high.
Yeah, yeah. And have you always been that way, or did you kind of hone your way of living? Because, of course, you have your new book out called "The Intentional Living" or
Living
"The Intentional
intentionally.
Life."
Yeah, living intentionally.
Living intentionally. Okay, got it backwards.
I think that, the story of my life is probably pretty typical of the, middle income, lower to middle income kid up through the age of 20 years old, went to college, had a crummy job out of college, all of that.
And
Uh,
did you grow up in New York?
yeah. Hmm.
Okay, yeah, because sometimes when I'm talking, I'm a native New Yorker as well, and so I always when I hear the traces of that accent, I just
Yeah.
feel a warm spot.
And I found like the first show of discipline was my work ethic. I didn't have a, big resume or a diploma from a school anyone cared about, or, a father who was an Olympian, nothing. And so I did find that if I worked diligently and harder than everyone else, or more hours than anyone else, then that would get me a return. So that was the beginning of a disciplined life, but it was very one dimensional. And
Mm,
so I didn't have a problem working 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 hours in a week. I
wow.
didn't consider like that was bad. I know I
What
had
was your
kids.
first job? That craft job out of college?
I worked in the mayor's office in New York City, and I was a financial analyst, and was uninspiring to say the least. Uh, but it's where I learned how to program, so I got into technology there because of that. So I guess it turned out well. But yeah, I was making $14,000 a year, which didn't
Wow.
allow for anything
Yeah.
really. I thought about it, it's pretty crazy. I like took home $700 or $800 a month. Like it's just hard to imagine even when I graduated college, that was enough. I couldn't. I had to live in my parents' basement. I couldn't afford to live on my own.
Yeah.
Uh, and so the discipline started by seeing the return on how I used my time. Uh,
Hmm.
and so then whenever I made a commitment to something, I sort of considered what that commitment was.
Mm,
And then I put a plan in place and I like to follow through. And so that first part of my life till I was, as I wrote about in all these different books, was 39 years old when I realized I was sort of falling apart though. So I was really good at working. I was making a lot of money. I had achieved, I was the earliest partner made in Ernst and Young way back when. It was like a whole sort of thing of like, wow, this is working. However, the rest of my life was empty, and I needed a little more fulfillment. So 25 years ago, I started with this spreadsheet and I started writing down what I was doing. And, it started with this, the story goes a mile and a push up because I couldn't do any more than that.
mm,
And what was interesting was because I had chosen, excuse me, to work so much. This is going to sound sad, but it really wasn't. I didn't have a big friend group. So I
mhm.
wasn't really going out. So when I leaned into doing some of these activities, it was fine. I wasn't like trying to take away from something else. And then my discipline uh, was oriented around yearly goals, So in the beginning, it was before I did any triathlons, I did biathlons. I would run, bike, run. I got pretty good at that. And I'm like, oh, I can't swim. So why don't I learn how to do this and shoot for an Ironman? And I worked for years to get that and did that many times over. And so all the discipline, the tracking of your time and your hours, your performance, your food, I wrote it all down. And I just didn't like having like an empty cell in the spreadsheet. So I just made sure I did something every day. And then I learned that, in life, the only person you really let down is yourself if you don't follow through on your commitments. And so if I was going to show up well for the world, for my family, for my community, then I had to sort of stand up to myself first so that, if I told Chrissy I was going to do something, that you could count on that. And I thought that was one of the responsibilities we should have. And so it was a practice. And funny word, right? Practice. That's what I did. And I'm still practicing every day. And it's sort of fun in a way to have written down what I've done every day for the past 25 years, because we could look it up right now. Like, what did I do on a Thursday in January in 2005? And I can go back and I'm like, oh, wow, that's pretty fun. So, yeah, I used that beginning sort of momentum, then established these practices. Then I realized that the accountability wasn't going to be with me and others. It was going to be with me and myself. And then the tracking really helped it. And then I like the counting idea, and it sounds fun. Like, oh my God, wow, that's a lot. So it just becomes like this blessing, really, at the end of the day.
So how do you, I mean, at this point, you've accomplished so many things. You've done so many crazy endurance events and triathlons and ultra marathons. And what motivates you at this point? Because
Oh,
I would think it would be tempting to kind of rest on your laurels, and
yeah.
what's the point of doing one more at this point?
I'm still so intently curious about how the human system, I use that word, I don't know, sometimes people don't like how the human system works, because it's this integrated platform. I mean, there's the biology, right? There's nature, there's how the mind works, there's the spirit, and I'm like, I feel like I'm just learning so much as I go.
Mm.
And what I found is the more you do, the more you feel, the more you learn, the more you enjoy it, the more benefit you get. And so I like have this a lot of energy by how I live. I have this deep level of curiosity. Like I'm a 6-year-old trying to figure out how to put his Lego set together. And I've been fortunate enough to learn a lot. So I feel like I have wisdom that keeps me from doing dopey things anymore. So yeah, it's, the thing that's been fascinating. I'm writing this third book, Beyond the Horizon of Self. It starts with the chapter, The Myth of More, and the development sort of, you know, what are we really as humans? And yes, I have purpose, but more deeply, what is our sort of collective responsibility? And I'd love to have gone deep enough into the topic to maybe influence some thinking that makes us live better together. And so if I were to back off, I don't think I've gone far enough to know enough so that I could truly role model the behavior that I think is better for all of us, not just for me. Like I'm committed even at my purpose is bold and humble. My purpose is to build myself so I could build others, but it goes broader, because if I can build others, we can build community. And if we go back into, the early Greek philosophers, we realize that, the rational person who uses, reason and ethics and morals to guide their life becomes a more productive human in community. And when we are, then we flourish. And when we flourish, life feels better, right? Not when we're selfish. Even if you have a lot more, you don't actually feel better. You just have a lot more. And so, because it goes against nature, because nature didn't set us up to be, as humans, to be individualistic. It set us up to be community, which is also why being plant-based is more important, because it allows us to share. Like, we have plenty of calories in the world to not need animals. We have plenty of resources so that everyone would feel, satisfied and satiated. We have so many opportunities in the world of abundance, but we're concentrating too much of it in a few rather than sharing it across the many. And so my hope here is that this combination of, what I've learned and how I've lived can show that there is a different way. My favorite saying is, like every day of mine's a vacation day. I never have a day of anything other than that because the word vacation feels appealing to people, not work. I could tell you I love work. I just love living. I like the integrated life. I think that I found a new level in the game and it's just quite satisfying. My friend is a neurobiologist, and we talk about the integration of our neurochemistry with how we feel, with how we show up, with what the possibilities and potential are. This idea that I like to live into, which is radical possibility. But to get there, you have to put yourself. It's like a F1 car that sits in the garage, which is what most people do. You got to drive it to make it go what it's capable of. And I think the same with us. So I'm feeling more like I'm, much earlier in my life journey than the calendar might give, credence to.
Well, when did you start living so intentionally? Because I would think, you were working, doing very well in business and that whole sector, and realized that other parts were missing. Number one, how did you identify the additional parts you wanted to bring into your life? And how did you balance that with work? And where did it go from there?
Yeah, I think, I don't think that I can tell a story that has like this light bulb moment, like, oh my God. And then all of a sudden I shifted. I think it was almost like Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. You have this elation, and then you have despair, and then you have resistance, and then you have success, and you cross the lines. And so I think I've had that because, the first time I as this partner at the firm, I was making $1 million a year. I walked away from that after 10 years to go to a startup. We had some great success with the startup, and I go back to IBM because we sold the company there, and I'm back at the big thing again. I fall right back into it. And so I had been making progress, then I slipped back. And then I was like, after 5 years there, I'm like, this isn't the person that's inside you or I want to be. So when I left there, I've not gone back. And part of that was, when you're a part of a very big system, it's sort of hard to know whether or not you're really contributing or not, no matter what anyone calls you or what's in your bank account. Mm-hmm. So that was really the beginning, but it didn't have this sense of anything other than performance, more broadly speaking. Mm-hmm. I didn't think about intentionality. I thought I grew up in a family of values, I wrote about in the book, like, I don't curse. I don't know whether that's good or bad, but I do it out of respect for my father because he didn't, and that's what he taught us. And so I always felt like I had a pretty reasonable moral compass. So that felt good. But I wrote a book in 2017 called, Living the High Performance Life. I was about minutes and seconds. I was about places and positions. I was trying to validate myself. I didn't know this. So I had the first escape, but still fell into the normal performance mindset. Even if I had walked away from the money, which was sort of liberating on that side, I hadn't broken down the barrier around, what was my ego driving me toward? And then, in 2017, I ran a marathon on 6 continents in 6 days. So that was
that. I've run 2 marathons in 1 year, not 6 in 6 days on 6 continents. You can't miss a day over there.
And that year, I also ran 10 other marathons, and then I thought this wasn't enough, so then I ran the Tahoe 200-mile race in September of that year. And at the end of that race, after a very significant struggle with having a really bad ankle injury, as I've written many, many times over, I had this moment of sort of probably that was the awakening. I started sobbing. I was crying for no reason at the finish line. It wasn't because of my ankle. I realized that, I'd spent most of my life trying to prove something to me, that I was worthy, that I mattered, that I could love myself. And, as one of my friends says to me, the best thing you do is fall in love with the little person you were a long time ago. Right? They got you to where you are. And I, in that moment, realized that that was what was happening. And so from there, the next book started to emerge. What was it that I was finding? And that's where purpose comes in. Yes, I had accepted the idea of discomfort and suffering as a pathway to growth. I started realizing that reflection was critical to not just like strong mindset, but an understanding of who we are and how we show up and what we do. And that I was working actively on the pillars of healthy living, but never articulated them. So from that moment, it was this like, oh, you now need to work on creating sort of this framework, not just because you had this breakthrough, but wouldn't it be great if you could then share that with other people? And maybe it doesn't take them 25 years to figure this out. Maybe there's a little bit of a shortcut on the way there. Not shortcut because it takes less time, but it is relatively well established, especially if you start then reading, what some of the other really strong, mindset coaches or philosophers have talked about over human history. It isn't a secret how to live well. It's actually the struggle is doing it. I was doing it. And then I thought, what if I created the contemporary version of that? And so the shift from living the high performance life to writing a book called Living Intentionally, deeply focused on purpose, community, and legacy. And now to the third in the series will be Beyond the Horizon of Self, which is, moving beyond the ego and getting ourselves prepared for a world where AI is going to have a big impact. And what's the archetype of the person who will be successful then? So,
well, that was a subject that I was planning to ask for your thoughts on AI, especially. I mean, just beginning with individually as a writer. For one, when did you start writing? When did you identify that as an aspect of your professional path?
well, back to again, I wish I was so smart that everything was completely intentional in the beginning. The the funny story about how the blog started, I just find fun for me. So, 2010 maybe, my daughter came home from college over the holidays. She said, "Hey, Dad, the boys are doing this push-up challenge. I think you'd like it." And there's a song by a guy named Moby. The song's called Flower, and he says basically, this is where we hear it: bring Sally up, bring Sally down, and you just push up and then you hold down when he says down. The song's 3 minutes and 26 seconds, and I could get to 2 minutes. And I'm like, wow, this is really hard. And so I started writing this email blog kind of thing to some friends about it. And I kept sharing my experience of what it was like to try to accomplish something that was so hard. And I was doing it every day. And it took, months and months of doing this every day. A second more, 5 seconds less. It seemed, I don't know, impossible kind of. I mean, it's something that I tell people, like, try it. See, there's only been like 3 people I've ever met who could do it the first time through. So I started sharing, and people were liking what I was writing. And they were like, oh, what else are you thinking about? And so I got this little email list, and I found what was happening was I was taking time every day to reflect, and I was starting to create this world of positivity that was helping me. And so I don't know in the beginning if I was a good writer or not, but I just was doing it every day. And there were some days, Chrissy, I would look at the screen and there's nothing,
Sure.
There's nothing in my head. And it was a really fascinating. And then I created some techniques to find triggers that would help me think about, I don't know what to write,
Yeah. Yeah.
Like if you gave me a topic, literally any topic, this is why I think I'm a good writer. I could write you a page on that topic
Sure.
in 10 minutes. So it just kept building. More people were enjoying reading it. I wasn't really writing it for them. I was writing it for me.
Mhm.
And, come time to run the 6 marathons, I've been doing this blog for, gosh, 6, 7 years. And then my friend said, you should write a book. I'm like, write a book? Like, I don't understand. Like, why would I do that? And who would care? And they're like, oh, yeah, people would be interested. And you have become a good writer. I'm like, oh, really? I guess I just was practicing every day
Mhm.
and just learning. Oh, the other thing that they kept teaching me was to write less. They're like, I'm not reading a page anymore. Send me a paragraph. I'm like, okay. And
There's no substitute for brevity.
I know.
Like no
So,
substitute. Yeah.
so I tightened it up. I developed a style. I liked the style because it just was me, and it has sort of a rhythm to it. And then I find it as satisfying and rewarding as going running is writing. It just opens up another part of my intellect, my system, my emotions, my mindset, and now I count on it, and it keeps me like, if you think about your life and you think like, oh yeah, there's these challenges, but every day you force yourself to write something positive, think of the positive effect that has on
Mhm.
yourself. Forget the world. Like
Sure.
I'm
Sure.
and so that has been, because I'm sure there are things that have happened that were rough, but I like, oh, and didn't notice kind of feeling. So then after the first book, I had hesitated to write another book. And then the same thing happened again. One of my friends said, stop being an idiot and just write the book. Because I had written a bunch of like longer form content, loved
Mhm.
writing that. And then, so anyway, that's what happens. And now someone says, like, what are your daily habits, like outside of, survival, like brush your teeth and eat food, but it's actually to run every day, to write every day. And I say breathe because when you breathe, resets the nervous system, brings me back to center. Like, so if anyone did all three of those activities every day, not breathing subconsciously, like
Yeah.
your
Breathing
breath,
intentionally,
yeah.
mindfully. Yeah.
And wow, like I just wonder, like I was interviewed for this documentary recently, and they said to me, how do you feel when people say that you're nuts for how you live? I'm like, I think they're nuts. I don't understand. Like, why wouldn't you live this way if you could feel this good? Like, it just
Mhm.
seems funny. Like, what they're miserable, and they're telling me, who feels great, excited, happy, well adjusted, impactful, hopefully successful, all these things, still married 37 years later. I got two wonderful, beautiful girls. Like, I just don't know what would be better.
Yeah.
So then how could I be nuts? Like
Yeah.
that language just seems ill placed.
Yeah. Never change a winning game. And you've clearly got a winning game.
Yeah, or tell me what's better. Like what would be like if someone says, okay,
Pick
you
your
should
pace.
sleep
Yeah.
more. I'm like, okay, I'll work on that. That's a fair comment. I like that idea. But
Yeah.
don't, what this is. This is someone manipulating me because how they feel about themselves.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
sorry, I can't go there.
Yeah, yeah, that's so interesting. Well, so what was that process? I mean, maybe it's hard to remember back, but what was that process like for you of writing that first book? Did you enjoy the process? Have you always been someone who just finds joy naturally in things, or does the joy sometimes have a delayed delayed response where after the fact you notice, oh, I'm happy.
No, I do love the process. I'll say this, when I started on my change path, I did it mostly privately. Like I didn't feel like the world needed to know what I was doing. So what? Like, I'm not here looking for likes and attaboys. I performed most no like for probably 10 plus 15 years. No one even knew the amount of racing I was doing, none of that. I mean, Anthea knew because I would disappear, like, oh, you're going to do another race. But otherwise, so the book was a bit of an obstacle because I just felt like it was going to be so focused on the ego of, oh, look how great I am.
Hmm.
That was uncomfortable, that part, because I don't want people to feel like they're any different. I'm not better. I'm just me. We all are equal. We all have similar opportunity in life to leverage the capability we have. So that part was a little bit of a challenge, to be honest. But I was told, it's fascinating. Like, I'm curious about, I don't know, Ernest Shackleton or Hillary or, I don't know, Abraham Lincoln, people who are amazing. We want to read about them and what they did. And so I'm not them, but I figured there's enough of what I've done that might interest other people. And if they're interested, then I should share it. So once I got over that hump, then I enjoyed it. It did push me back to the early part of my life, which I had paid very little attention to for a long time. I can't even remember 4 people I went to high school with. I couldn't tell you a teacher's name in elementary school. I don't carry the past very heavy. My experiences, the wisdom from it, but not the specifics. I find too many people live feeling wronged, and I don't want to feel that way. But it did push me back to some things that happened that probably did make me who I am. We call it bullying today. I think that's what happened when I was in high school. I was the kid who had to quit the track team because it was awfully uncomfortable. Who knows why exactly? I can't remember. Just like, but so I went back through a lot of that because I always feel like if you only look at my accomplishments, it'll be intimidating. I think it's important to know that I went through the same path that almost everyone else would have to go through as well. The struggle, the lack of success, the lack of support, the building oneself, and so the book was really very cathartic in that way. And when it came out, it was very satisfying because it was like, okay, someone once said this really interesting part about a book is that we'll all leave this earth in our physical form at some point. And if you have a book, you live on, not just through your spirit, but by what you wrote. And I thought, well, that's pretty cool. Maybe in 100 years, someone will read that, or my second book or third book. So it's just it's hard. It's hard to know what to write the first time. Like what are the chapters, etc. So I love learning. It was a great process. I never thought I'd be an author. Now I know that I am one. Number 2, because number 3 is really pushing me hard, and I don't think it'll end.
So, well, I'm a writer myself, more fiction than nonfiction.
Oh.
Did you ever consider writing fiction?
Way back way before any of this. So I believe that each of us have this, fire burning inside of us that either we put out or we let it go. And so when I had work that was less challenging in the early days of my life, I would write short stories because I had to get this fire to do something, like it was like burning. And I just would write some story. I loved, when I haven't read much nonfiction in a long time, and fiction in a long time, but I love The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings and the era of fantasy and exploration. So that was fun. So I tried my hand at it, but I think my inclination was, where was I an expert? And I became more an expert in the lived experience. So nonfiction, but it would be fun to think maybe after this next book, if I could do that, that would be a great challenge.
Yeah. Interesting.
Wow.
Well, so with regard to AI, how do you see, just the interplay of AI with artists and creatives? Because for me, I know that I really had been having a bit of an existential crisis, because it's clear that, or at least to me, people differ on this view, but it's pretty clear to me that AI is advancing so rapidly that it will soon be surpassing, maybe not soon, but at some point it will surpass, the capabilities of most humans, and be able to produce, a more interesting book, a better written, story, movie, film, piece of art. So where does that leave us, artists and creatives, who often have kind of relied on that creativity of ours as the thing that makes us special?
Yeah.
Like, what if that's no longer a rare commodity that's available to anybody? For me, I kind of landed on something what something you touched on, which is there's no other tool that for me helps me explore myself and push my own limits and just discover what's within me the way that writing does. And so for that reason alone, that was always part of the motivation. Now maybe that has to be the fundamental prime motivator. But yeah, what's
Hmm.
your take on that? And have you had the same existential crisis regarding AI, or are you just curious about it all?
No, no. I mean, there's many dimensions to it. I mean, there's a chapter in my book. It was in the preface when I had that, like, oh my God, do we really care about living intentionally if AI is running our lives? And my conclusion was we have to be more intentional, not less. I run a company that builds AI software to help small businesses sell better. So I'm building software to facilitate complex human conversations between an AI agent and a person. I think that there's one part that very few people talk about, which is if you were to say that the human does not evolve anything from today, then I think there could be some existential risk. What I don't think we've contemplated is how much our human system can improve and operate in a new world. That if we stayed fixed, sure, we might get past. But if we develop, like I think of orchestration, coordination, the creativity that we're capable of delivering, I still think that AI has not got the same biochemical composition to drive creativity. It can only sort of replay in its own way, and it might look like creativity, but it's not completely novel. And so I just think the same struggle that the farmer had when they used to have the plow in their backyard and now they run a satellite in their tractor, their role has changed. There aren't as many, they just do it differently. I like the idea of having a writing coach, and I've turned AI into a writing coach, not a doer for me. And the other writing coaches I've had, they're okay. This one's better, and because I can make it not do something like it reads a paragraph or a chapter and says, that's not that good, and it pushes me to do better. And so, that's what a person would do for me, right? It makes me better, and so I don't see it as taking over. I see it as a resource that I should put to use to make me better, and as I continue to improve, I will keep pace with it. And I will figure out how to live and exist in that world because humans have learned how to do that over time, and we're going to do that again.
So interesting. So, on a practical level, how do you use it as a writing coach?
Yeah, just the questions that I ask, are something like, am I making a strong enough point?
So you'll enter your content
Yes,
into.
yeah, into a private version of, say, ChatGPT or Gemini,
Mhm.
and my goal is for like that's one question I like to ask is what did I leave out? What am I missing? Um, you know, did I make the point strong enough? So it would be the same questions I would ask of a person. I would
Interesting.
never ask an editor to rewrite a chapter. Like that's not their job.
Yeah.
And so you can ask it to rewrite for you like that,
Yeah.
sure. But if you use it this way, I love it because sometimes it makes it really hard because it gives me these challenges and I'm like, oh my God, I don't know what I'm going to do. Like there's a chapter I'm writing in this new book. I'm not writing it synchronously like or in series. I wrote on the chapter called The Good Run, my Badwater experience running this 135 miles through Death Valley this past summer. And I wrote basically a recounting of the run. At mile 80, I did this. At mile 100, and it came back and it said, you let the reader off the hook. You solved every issue for them, and this isn't that interesting. So go back into how you felt and leave it much more open, and don't solve. The finish line is not the solving. Everything I happened, I fixed. Everything I happened, fixed. And it was just, and so when I went back to it, I realized that that's what I was doing. I didn't bring you into the depth of, like, so for example, this is a funny part, but like, I had started at mile 1, but the race started in January of last year when I got into the race. That's when it started. And what was the reaction that I got from my friends and family when I told them? How did that feel? Didn't feel good because everyone disliked the idea. Too dangerous, not good, don't want to support you. And I had to carry that. And so well, I don't know, if I had given it to a friend, they probably would have said, wow, that's interesting,
Interesting. Yeah.
And so it's been helping me step back and see, am I capable of, living up to that kind of challenge? And so I think this is an example of where I said, wow, I just hired a fantastic editor, and I'm going to work with it that way, and I will write better as a result, me writing. So I think it can happen again and again. What the software that we're building for this company, Rainmaker, the most important part of it is the orchestrator. Right? The orchestrator controls all the different elements that go on. It knows how the conversation's happening, what knowledge you need, how to schedule, how to take payment. And so we're creating this layer that tells me, that is what, and it's being done in a computer, right? But that's what the human should be capable of doing at some point, coordinating all of that and being able to think about how does it use the AI to make their business better. We're focused on small businesses because small businesses are a challenge. You don't have enough resources. How do you do this? Mm-hmm. And so what if I can simplify one part of your life so that you can do better in the other part of your life? Then you rise up rather than feel sort of pulled down. I think, we'll only have a dystopian world if that's what we want. I don't believe it will happen unless we let it. And I think that even if AI can proverbially cure cancer, I don't think that changes that we would just operate differently in that era. And I don't think it's about having more leisure time or more work time. I think it's a new problem that we've evolved to figure out how to live in these worlds. I mean, what would Aristotle know how to live in 2026? Some things yes and some things no. And I think the same evolution will happen. But the core values of how the human works, how to show up better, how to be better in our community, all those should still exist in the next 2,500 years.
Very interesting. Yeah, so bringing it back to veganism, how has your veganism evolved over this time, since 20 plus years ago when you first started thinking a little bit about it to where you are today?
I think that I don't have any belief that everyone will be a vegan. What I would love is a world where we eat less and less meat and animal products. So I try to now use what I've learned to show that you can open the aperture. You don't have to have the same stuff. You can try this beautiful and delicious butternut squash with, Brussels sprouts, and people have this thing about tofu. I can make it so you'd never even say oh my God, that's amazing how delicious this is, Yeah. So I'd like to share. And so part of what I'm doing is not trying to, back to I'm not here to tell people how to live, but I want to support them, is to show people this is what happens. This is all of the preconceived notions that I had. Had I not gone through that, I would feel less capable. So my goal is to, in Denver, we have this really amazing vegan sushi place. And, rolls are a combination of so many ingredients. So I don't know how you know the difference, but I take everyone there because they like, what does that mean, vegan sushi? Well, I know we still use language that connects to the old sort of meat-based world. And they leave there saying, like, wow, this is an incredible food experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's my goal, is just to inform and educate, try and take from 21 meals a week, maybe down to 10, eating in a certain way. I've been working with Rip Esselstyn on his Plant Strong business and trying to get more of it in the hands of people so that they can just replace meal after meal and
Mm-hmm.
it just increases. And I think we'll have a whole number of people who will become 100% vegan. That's phenomenal. But if we can move the world, that's the same with my exercise. No one's going to exercise probably as much as I am. But if we get people moving just 3 days a week, like the world just gets better. So that's what I try and bring, this enthusiasm for a lifestyle that can improve how you live. And if you just start on that path, who knows where you might end up. And so I enjoyed that. But if you don't have the experience, then you don't know what to say. You know, we were in Vegas for work, and we went to an all plant-based restaurant with a couple of people, and they were like, "What the heck is this?" And at the end, the same thing. They were like, "That was amazing food." Like, I just think we have to sometimes just show people that
Yeah.
it's not what you think.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So that helps, and I think we're making some progress.
Yeah, definitely. In fact, I was living in New York City when the first vegan sushi restaurant opened up there. And since then, I actually had that chef on this show. And
Mm.
he was, fantastic. And it was so interesting hearing his perspective. And now he's got several top notch, Michelin rated restaurants in different cuisines, and just how intentional he was about that process with his staff and just being committed to, there's not going to be any reduction in quality or the experience itself. We're going to bring all the same accoutrements to just the atmosphere and the flavors and the spectrum of, just tastes and all of that. So it was fascinating to hear that. But you're right. You're absolutely right. I think, especially if you've been vegan for a while, we tend to assume that people know that there are vegan versions of everything. There's all
Mm.
kinds of delicious vegan junk food, and that vegan food is, delicious. But you're absolutely right. A lot of people have no idea. So
We
just,
made a lion's mane. Someone's like, "Whoa, that's really weird that you're cooking a lion," and like, "Oh, right, no one knows it's a mushroom." So, uh, so it's
people
part of it
are
is
ignorant. Yeah.
it's education.
Yeah. Yeah.
Of course, 11 Madison was a 3-star Michelin restaurant as a vegan restaurant. They've gone back to like a mixed cuisine now, but
Mm.
David Hume showed what you can do with plants if you can be member of a community supported agriculture. It's hard to imagine any food tasting better. Part of the problem with some of our vegetables and fruits are they've been, nitrogen balanced and are sitting around for a long time. So having like, farm-based butternut squash, I like with 2 ingredients. And I know there are people who are oil free, but I'm not, but olive oil and salt and pepper. That's the ingredients in butternut squash, and it tastes like candy, literally candy. So I think we can open people's minds to it. And I think, in the same with writing about living intentionally, and how we show up. That's the most important lesson that I've learned. If you want the world to be different, then role model the behavior that you want it to be. And then we're good at copying. And then people tend to do better as a result.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's well put. As they say, attraction, not promotion, and there's no substitute for that power of example. Because if
Yes.
we're not embodying it, then who's going to want to be that? Like, it just wouldn't make sense.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, final question, which I like to ask all of my guests, and I kind of have an inkling what your answer might be, but we'll see. What's a single word that for you sums up what being vegan is all about?
Impact.
That
Yeah.
wasn't my guess, but yeah,
Hmm.
say a little more about that.
Well, the act of being vegan makes a very measurable positive impact on the world.
You
It,
like measurements and you like data, I can
yeah,
tell. Yeah.
yeah. It's not sort of like an interesting, nice to have. It's not like I don't know. Like this one is proven. It makes a difference at every level, environmentally, animal, nutrition, health, personality. Like it is all of it measurable. And I like to do things that make a positive impact. So
Mm,
that's there's other parts that would be, but that's the one probably that if you wonder if
mm.
you're doing good, this is one way to do good.
Right. No, I think that's a fabulous point. Yeah, and that's a word that I have not yet heard someone mention
All
for
right.
their word. But yeah, that makes sense. Because I know in my, just in my personal life, I remember hearing people pose that question, like, if only there were one thing, something that I could do to, help increase compassion or help with, environmental challenges or, and those moments, well, maybe you might try like eating actual food rather than, the products of torture and suffering,
Right.
maybe.
Hmm.
So you're right. Yeah, it's all within our reach. And right there, you at least have a purpose right there. And,
Right.
the starting of a broader purpose.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which we all benefit from when we have that.
Right. 100%. Well, where's the best place for people to buy your book? Do you have a preferred
Oh, it's on
platform?
Amazon, so that's easy for everyone. We don't love the company, but it does do on-demand printing, so that's really nice. So it's not like it keeps stuff in the warehouse. Only when someone orders it, then it's available. So that's probably the best, most simple way to do it.
Okay, awesome. And we'll include all your social media information and website and um, the ways that people can find you and follow you in the show notes. Anything else that we didn't cover that you want to
Well,
mention?
no, I just appreciate what you're doing and message you're getting out into the world, and we all need to do more of that. So everyone listening, keep listening, and I think we can all make this positive impact by the choices that we make. That's the life that we create, and if we want it to be as aligned as we can to nature, then we have to take care of the planet, the animals, and ourselves, and that's what matters.
Agreed. Yeah, very well said. Yeah, and that little person inside us that you referred to at the very start.
Exactly.
Yeah, don't forget about that person. All right, well, we close every episode by taking 30 seconds of silence for all the suffering animals, human and non human, who desire, as we all do, safety, happiness, and the freedom to live out their lives without interference. So, Joe, I invite you to join me in 30 seconds of silence for the animals, and we'll conclude with the sound of the bell. Thank you,
Thank you,
Joe,
Joe.
and thank you, Posse. See you
Thank
next
you.
time. Until then, stay strong and stay true.